Part 1: The Awakening No One Talks About.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
There's a silent movement happening across the world. You won't see it trending. You won't hear about it on the news. But it's real. Men quietly, deliberately are walking away from careers that suffocate, relationships that drain, expectations that enslave. They are not doing it out of anger, laziness, or rebellion. They are doing it out of clarity, and the world doesn't know what to do with them. You've felt it, haven't you? That subtle pressure everywhere to be useful, to be productive, to be a provider, or to climb, to chase, to conquer. But no one ever stops to ask why. Why are we told that a man's worth comes from achievement, status, or external success? Why is stillness seen as weakness? Why is solitude mistaken for failure? This journey begins when a man starts asking questions that terrify most people. Questions like, what if everything I was taught about success is a lie? What if the life I've built isn't mine? What if I don't want what everyone else seems to chase? These aren't signs of breakdown. They're signs of awakening. And awakening, in a society obsessed with sleepwalking, looks like madness. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But how can we make ourselves when everything around us is trying to make us into something else? From childhood, we are conditioned. Grades, discipline, obedience, performance. We are sculpted into tools for systems that feed on our time, our energy, and our silence. But some rare men wake up and say, no more. These are not men who hate society. They are men who see through it. They see the games, the illusions, the hierarchies built on insecurity. They see how media sells outrage, how schools teach obedience, how culture rewards conformity. And most of all, they see how easy it is to live 80 years without ever living at all. So they step away. Not with fanfare, but with focus. This is where the real journey begins. Not in rebellion, but in retreat. These men do something radical. They stop. They unplug. They vanish from the algorithm. They turn down promotions. They leave cities. They abandon titles. And in the silence that follows, something ancient begins to speak. A voice that was buried beneath years of noise, their own. But this path is not for the faint of heart. The moment you step off the beaten path, the world turns cold. Friends don't understand. Family grows concerned. You're called irresponsible, immature, selfish. They say you're wasting your potential. But what they don't see is that you're finally reclaiming it. Have you ever looked at your life and realized that most of it was built on fear? Fear of being poor, fear of being alone, fear of being judged. And so you ran the race, wore the mask, played the role until one day you couldn't pretend anymore. That moment isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. It's the start of the mindset that no one teaches but every free man discovers. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But most men have never found their why. They were handed one. A job title, a family role, a societal script. The men who reject society's path don't do it because they're lost. They do it because they've finally seen that the map they were following leads nowhere real. And so they take a different route, a pathless one. They start to rebuild from within. They become students again, not in universities, but in solitude, in books, in nature, in silence. They learn to sit with discomfort, to wrestle with their own demons, to question everything. And slowly they begin to remember what it means to be alive. This is where the transformation begins. When you stop chasing what others told you to want, your true desires surface. You realize you don't need a bigger house, you need more space inside your soul. You don't need more followers, you need more presence. You don't need to be admired, you need to be whole. And wholeness cannot be found in a paycheck or a title. It can only be found in truth. But truth is dangerous. It threatens the entire structure society has built. A man who no longer seeks approval is uncontrollable. A man who no longer fears solitude is unbreakable. A man who defines success on his own terms is unstoppable. That's why most systems are designed to keep men distracted, domesticated, dependent. The moment you wake up, you become a threat not to others, but to the illusion they live in. So ask yourself, am I living a life I chose or one I inherited? Do I know what I believe, or do I just believe what I was told? If no one judged me, what would I do with my time? My energy? My life? These are not casual questions. They are doorways, and once you walk through, you can never go back. The rejection of society's path is not about isolation, it's about integration. It's about returning to yourself, so that when you engage with the world again, you do it from a place of power, not programming. You speak, not to be heard, but because you have something real to say. You act, not to impress, but to express. You live, not to survive, but to awaken. This awakening often happens in stages. First comes the disillusionment, you realize the game is rigged. Then comes the detachment, you stop playing the game. Then comes the darkness, the void where your old identity dies. And finally, if you're willing to stay in that darkness, comes the light, the clarity, the peace, the presence, the mindset of a man who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. You may wonder, what does this path look like practically? It's not about escaping responsibility. It's about redefining it. It's about choosing commitments that align with your soul, not your insecurities. It's about creating, not consuming. Leading, not performing. Being, not becoming. And it starts with one simple but terrifying act: telling the truth. Tell the truth about what you feel, what you want, what you fear, what you've avoided, what you've denied. Because until you do, you're just wearing another mask. And life is too short to die wearing a disguise. The men who reject society's path don't do so out of pride. They do so out of necessity. Because when the cost of fitting in becomes your soul, the only sane option is to walk away. And when you do, you discover something extraordinary. You were never alone. There is a brotherhood of men scattered, silent, unseen, who have all made the same choice, who have all walked into the wilderness. And in that wilderness, they found themselves. Part 2. The fire we choose to walk through. There comes a moment in every man's inner journey when comfort is no longer tolerable. Not because life becomes unbearable, but because numbness becomes louder than pain. That's when something ancient begins to stir, something society tries to suppress in us from the very beginning. It's the call to leave the village, to walk alone into the unknown, to face what lies beyond what is safe, planned, and accepted. But let's be clear, this path is not romantic. It is not a fantasy of escape. It is a fire. And the men who walk it must be willing to burn their illusions, burn their masks, burn the stories they've been told about who they are and what they're supposed to want. Society sells freedom as comfort, but real freedom begins where comfort ends. And the men who choose this path do so because they value truth over ease. What happens when you stop seeking permission? A quiet revolution. You no longer wait for validation to live the life you feel in your bones. You stop asking if your dreams are realistic. You stop explaining your solitude. You stop apologizing for choosing depth over distraction. And in that rejection of permission, you reclaim something most men have lost: sovereignty. But sovereignty comes at a cost. You will be misunderstood, misjudged, left out. People will question your decisions, your masculinity, your sanity. And it will hurt, not because they are right, but because there is still a part of you that wants to be seen and accepted. Saying that part must be faced, not shamed, not repressed, but integrated. The man who rejects society's path doesn't become heartless, he becomes whole. In this world, it is far easier to be a slave than to be free. Slavery offers predictability, deadlines, paychecks, likes, promotions. But freedom? Freedom offers nothing but raw potential, and that's terrifying. Because when nothing is guaranteed, everything is possible. And when everything is possible, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You must create your life or die waiting. This is why most men stay in the cage, even when the door is wide open. The cage is familiar. The path of rejection, however, leads into the wilderness of the self. And in that wilderness, there is no map, only instinct, discipline, and faith. The mindset of these men is forged not in books or lectures, but in solitude, failure, and the relentless pursuit of inner integrity. They don't follow trends, they follow truth. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's not just a motivational quote, it's a blueprint. Every obstacle is an invitation. Every discomfort is a doorway. Every rejection by society is a return to self. But only if you have the courage to see it that way. This mindset is not about becoming a hermit or a monk, unless that's your calling. It's about no longer being a slave to what Nietzsche called the herd mentality. It's about realizing that society doesn't actually want you to thrive, it wants you to comply. It wants you to consume, to compete, to conform. And if you dare to step outside that machinery, you become a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable. You see it in their eyes when you tell them you've quit your high-paying job to pursue something uncertain. You see it in their awkward silence when you say you're not interested in traditional success. You see it in their judgment when you choose solitude over social validation. But what they call isolation, you know as alignment. What they call failure, you know as freedom. Have you ever sat in silence for days, without distractions, and faced the rawness of your own mind? That's the kind of initiation no university can offer. That's where your fears rise like storms and where your soul begins to speak. The men who reject society's path don't run from discomfort, they seek it out. Because they understand that every layer of pain hides a deeper layer of power. Joseph Campbell spoke of the hero's journey, the call to adventure, the descent into darkness, the return with wisdom. Most men hear the call, but only a few answer it. Why? Because answering means leaving behind the familiar. And the familiar is seductive. But the man who walks the true path knows that comfort is the enemy of transformation. He chooses the unknown not because it's easy, but because it's real. There's a moment always where everything falls apart. The job is gone. The relationship ends. The identity crumbles. And in that void, you're left with nothing but yourself. That's the crucible. That's the test. Will you run back to safety? Or will you stay in the fire until something new is born? That's where men are made, not in boardrooms or gyms or social media, but in the silence after collapse. This is where the second birth begins. It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with stillness, with breath, with presence. You begin to rebuild not from ambition, but from essence. You start creating not to prove, but to express. You start leading not for power, but from purpose. And everything that once mattered, status, applause, image, becomes irrelevant. You begin to notice different things. The way your breath moves in your chest, the sound of wind through trees, the depth of eye contact with a stranger, the sacredness of ordinary moments. This is not detachment, it's presence. You are no longer lost in the future or haunted by the past. You are here. Fully. Finally. And in this state, something powerful emerges, clarity. You know what is yours to do. Not because someone told you, but because your soul confirms it. And you begin to move from that place. No longer chasing. No longer convincing. Just doing what is true, step by step, breath by breath. This is the mindset of men who no longer need society's applause because they found something far greater, self-respect. But beware, this peace will be tested. The world will try to pull you back with money, with fear, with flattery, with doubt. You will be tempted to shrink, to soften, to conform. But every time you say no, you sharpen your edge, you fortify your center, you become unshakable. So ask yourself, where am I still seeking comfort over truth? What part of me is afraid to be fully seen? Am I living as a man or performing as one? These questions are not easy, but they are essential. Because until you ask them, you are just another product of a system that profits from your silence. The men who reject society's path are not better than others, they are simply awake. Awake to the cost of compromise. Awake to the power of solitude. Awake to the truth that a man's life is not measured by how well he fits in, but by how deeply he knows himself. And when you know yourself, you no longer need the world to tell you who you are. Part 3. The power of a man who stands alone. There is an unmistakable gravity around a man who no longer plays society's game. You feel it before he speaks. You see it in his eyes, calm, unhurried, unafraid. He is not trying to sell you anything. He is not trying to impress. There is no performance left in him, only presence. And in that presence, there is power. The silent, indestructible kind that cannot be bought, borrowed, or faked. These are not men who abandon responsibility. These are men who redefine it. Responsibility for them is not about upholding expectations, it is about honoring truth. The truth of who they are. The truth of what they are called to do, and the truth of how they must live if they are to remain free. They don't run from duty, they run from deception. You must understand this is not a rejection of society for the sake of rebellion. It is a refusal to live a life that is not your own. It is the realization that no title, no salary, no applause can substitute for a life lived with inner alignment. And once you taste that alignment, there is no going back. You begin to feel what it means to be sovereign, not just in action, but in thought, in emotion, in being. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." But most men never find that something. They are too busy trying to survive in systems that were never built for the soul. In consumption replaces creation. Distraction replaces direction. The comfort replaces courage. And slowly they forget why they were born at all. But the man who walks away, he feels the ache of that forgetting and chooses to remember. He remembers by listening, not to the world, but to the silence inside. He remembers by watching, not what others are doing, but what his own heart is asking. He remembers by stripping away everything false, until only the essential remains. And in that remembering, he becomes something rare, a man with direction that no one else had to give him. This man doesn't need motivation, he has purpose. He doesn't need validation, he has vision. And he doesn't need to be carried because he has learned to stand, and to stand alone. Not in isolation, but in independence. He can collaborate, love, connect, but he does so from fullness, not emptiness. He brings something to the table, not because he needs to be needed, but because he is already whole. This is why society doesn't understand him. Because society thrives on insecurity. It needs you to doubt yourself, to compare yourself, to need what it offers. But the sovereign man no longer needs, he chooses. He chooses what to give his time to, who to share his energy with, how to live each day. Not from fear, but from clarity. Not from pressure, but from peace. But peace isn't passive. It is forged in fire. It is earned through countless moments of choosing truth over comfort, depth over distraction, silence over noise. The mindset of a man who rejects society's path is not born overnight. It is built slowly, deliberately, painfully. It is built every time you say no to what dims your light. Every time you walk away from what doesn't honor you. Every time you face yourself instead of fleeing. Buddha said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." And so these men guard their minds like sacred ground. They do not let the news, the trends, the gossip, the noise dictate their inner world. They curate their inputs. They protect their focus. They choose their battles, their friends, their influences with precision. Because they know the quality of your mind determines the quality of your life. And when your inner world is clean, your outer life becomes clear. You stop needing constant change to feel alive. You stop chasing intensity to mask your emptiness. You become steady, grounded, deliberate. You start to create not to impress, but to express what is real inside you. You start to lead not through dominance, but through presence. And you start to live not for survival, but for purpose. But purpose is not something you find in a book. It is something you uncover through action, through saying yes to what scares you, through walking away from what no longer fits, through sitting in the silence until your soul begins to speak. And when it speaks, you listen. And when you listen, you follow. Even when it costs you everything you thought you needed. This is the great paradox. The man who rejects society's path often ends up giving more to the world than the man who conforms. Why? Because he gives from truth, not performance. He builds what matters. He speaks what's real. He creates what lasts. And he lives in a way that reminds others of something they forgot, that they too are free. So ask yourself, am I living or performing? What have I accepted as truth without ever questioning? If everything I had was taken from me, my job, my status, my identity, what would remain? That is your foundation. That is your essence. And if you don't know it, you don't know yourself. The man who rejects society's path doesn't disappear from the world. He returns to it one day, but on his own terms. He returns not to be absorbed, but to serve, not to be seen, but to see. He carries no agenda, no need to prove. He simply lives, fully, presently, powerfully. And in doing so, he becomes a lighthouse, quiet, unmoving, yet unmistakable. And those who are ready will find him not because he advertised, but because he radiated something rare, authentic freedom. That is the power of a man who stands alone. And that is the mindset of men who reject society's path.